and live on television. Greetings to all of you who are, I don't know where the camera is, but who are watching this evening. So, let's begin. That is the lifeboat from the Titanic. No, we're having a problem here. Let's see here. Tested it all ahead of time. Why is it mirroring me? Oh, gosh. Something me off of here. Oh, that's fine. There we go. All right. Okay. Okay, I think we're on our way. So Lifeboat, Radical Reorientation for Catholic Survival, a weekend wake-up call. I spent a lot of time thinking about the name for this because I want to be able to convey it densely and give people a sense of the importance and the urgency of what's involved with this. So the introduction. From the earliest days of Christianity, the church has been symbolized by a boat, beginning with the bark of Peter. So there's a painting of it, a painting by George Tissot. It's in the Brooklyn Museum of Art. Jesus preached from Peter's boat. He worked the miracle of the miraculous catch of fish from that boat. He was asleep in that boat during the storm, and he walked past it at night, you might remember, and that's when Peter got out and walked on the water, at least briefly. Some of you may be aware of St. John Bosco's famous dream of the church as a ship on a stormy sea, and it is piloted by, you can see right there, the Pope, and he's guiding it into safety through the two pillars of the Eucharist and Our Lady. And the other boats represent the other churches, some of which follow this big ship into a safe harbor. So what did Peter's boat look like? Well, we actually have a pretty good idea because in 1985 there was a drought that lowered the level of the Sea of Galilee enough that two brothers who were fishermen were able to find the ruins of a first century boat. Now, I'm not saying that that boat was Peter's boat, but it gives us a pretty good idea of what a small first century fishing boat looked like. So the boat was so fragile it took 11 years to extract. It is 27 feet long by 7 feet wide by 4 feet deep. It is patched together out of 10 different kinds of wood, so it's kind of a makeshift, and it could hold 15 passengers. It has been carbon dated to the first century, so that's a replica there. And these are some 3D models that they put together of that boat from different angles. Very, very simple with just a square mast and able to be rowed. So actually, a lot of times when we see the boats of Peter represented in films, it's a little bit more advanced than it probably was in actual reality. So this is a perfect image for the primitive church, right? Jesus in the boat with the disciples, the boat of Peter. It's an image that can be adapted to correspond to the church at different points in her history. So, for example, that's the apostolic age, the bark of Peter. The mission or the patristic age may be a galley, okay? The monastic age, a larger ship with a mast. Then we get to the Reformation. That's actually, I think it's the Santa Maria, a replica of one of Columbus's ship. Then the missionary age, a huge galleon. And then what 20th century could be an image of that is a steamship, an ocean liner, huge, seemingly unsinkable, right? Very large, stable, secure. And maybe the 70s. Just kidding. But there's a problem, because at some point, this happened.
Veering to port, 22 knots, sideswipes the iceberg. Murdoch ports around the iceberg, try to keep from hitting the propellers. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now we're watching an accelerated time. We see the first 5 compartments flood. They equalize pretty quickly. Bows pulled down. We see the port list. Port list looks right. Now looks like about 9 degrees. Well, you can
actually watch on YouTube a real-time 3D video reproduction of the sinking of the Titanic. This is a special on that larger production that has a commentary with people who have studied it, and you can see what happened. The Titanic hit an iceberg. The big, unsinkable, stable, secure church of the 20th century hit an iceberg and is sinking.
Now the bow is accelerating.
And we've spent way too much time rearranging the chairs, the deck chairs, on a ship that's sinking. Not a church, but that image of the church. We spent way too much time trying to preserve it, protect it, prolong it, because that image of the church is sinking. But there's hope, because this also happened. You have to look closely. This is going to be in slow motion. And just watch right over here. Okay, you see it? The image of the church for today, I propose to you, is a lifeboat. Not a steamliner, but a lifeboat. To help people not drown, to pull people in from the ocean. Not a huge, massive infrastructure, but a boat that is very much like what Pope Francis says when he calls the church a field hospital, right? Not a St. Joseph's and Patterson, enormous, but a hospital that operates on the field of battle. And I'd like to propose to you that the image that is fitting for the church today is a lifeboat. There is the bark of Peter, and there's the lifeboat. They're almost the same size. And we're going to learn from the early church too. So a very similar size construction, the church of today and the church of the first century. So the church isn't over or altered in her nature, only changed in her appearance and size. And that's why I went through that succession of images, right? So that as the church developed, it was a different kind of ship that could symbolize her. But again, I propose to you that for today, for the church of today, the lifeboat is appropriate. And this means a drastically different way of looking at things. If St. Joseph Church in East Rutherford is the lifeboat for this neighborhood, what does that mean? Where does our focus need to be? How do we need to respond to the circumstances around us? This is the radical reorientation that I was talking about, of perspective. But it opens a new horizon of hope because it gives us a fresh, original way of responding. And that's what we're going to look at tonight and tomorrow night. So there's a book that some of you may have heard of. It's called From Christendom to Apostolic Mission. It's written by a man, Monsignor John Shea, I believe is his name. He's associated with, I think, Wyoming Catholic College. And this is exactly what he proposes, that we have gone through what Pope Francis called an epochal change. And so we need to have a shift in our paradigm of thinking, or what he calls the ruling imaginative vision, the concept that we have in our minds of the church. We have to adjust that, because this is also my contention. You're going to be familiar with some of the statistics and information that I give you this evening. But I think we live in kind of practical denial. In the one sense, we know that that's true, but we don't have a sense of urgency, or a sense of possibility, or a sense that we might need to do some things differently. We keep doing the same things over and over, and we're moving in the same direction. So where are we exactly, and how did we get here? You heard me at Mass today or yesterday talk about my hometown, St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. Beautiful place. That's the center of our town. They call it the Diamond. It's a winter picture there. So it was a Catholic settlement founded in 1832 by a group of Bavarian immigrants, and it was originally called Marienstadt, Marytown. It was 100% Catholic for almost 100 years, so very, very fervent. In its heyday, there were 3 Catholic parishes, each of which had a grade school, 1 Catholic high school, a Benedictine convent of more than 100 religious women for a population of about 12,500. It was the source of many priestly and religious vocations. But as I told you in the letter from the bishop, between 2000 and 2020, Mass attendance plummeted 81%. Now, some of that can be adjusted for population shift. The total population has gone down 12%, but that could also mean that more people left, but other people came in. But there's no way you can get that number below 50%. As a matter of fact, I think it's much higher. And this is a 5-alarm fire. The convent closed in 2014. The 3 parish grade schools have been combined into 1. The high school enrollment is down 75%, and 2 of the 3 parishes are now partnered under the same pastor. This is a 5-alarm fire. This is when I get to play with the transitions. Even though the reality varies in different places, it is the worst in the Northeast and on the 2 coasts, right? Particularly the Northeast because of all the ethnic parishes. Like you go to the Bronx, and even here in New Jersey, you can have a church every few blocks. And that just became unsustainable. But it's a similar trend in most places of the country. The number of Catholics has dropped to only 20% of the population. It is outstretched by a group called the nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S. When they are asked about their religious affiliation, they say none. They may have faith, but they don't want to identify with any particular religious tradition. Only approximately 20% of Catholics attend Mass with any regularity, and it's worse for the youth. 85% leave within 7 years of their confirmation. That comes out of Notre Dame, Christian Smith, has done a lot of research on young Catholics. The influx of Latino immigrants has mitigated the decline a little bit. They currently count for 1/3 of the Catholics in the United States, but the danger is that with inculturation comes assimilation and accommodation. The percentage of Catholics among US Latinos has steadily declined over the past 15 years, and this chart will help us to understand. So, you can see, and I can't quite see that date there, but this is the percentage of Latinos who are Catholic. But as we move here, it drops from 62 to 40, whatever that is, more than 20% over a relatively short period of time. Approximately 2,600 Catholic schools have closed since the year 2000. Let that sink into your head. 2,600 at an average of 130 per year. It slowed down a little bit after COVID because I think people saw how well Catholic schools performed, and so it's about 50 a year, and there have been 20 new schools opened in that period. I couldn't find hard statistics on convents, but my own guess was confirmed informally by just kind of asking people. My guess is that approximately 90% of convents of religious sisters in parishes are no longer occupied by religious. And this is where I think we begin to easily go into denial. The school here is being used, but it's not a Catholic school. And there aren't religious sisters here. So this is a chart, and I think it was before COVID, 2017 or 18, that shows the decline in mass attendance based on age groups. But you can see that they're all moving in the wrong direction. This is a chart from 2015 by the Center for, it's in Washington, D.C. Let me see if I can find the name for it. The Center of Applied Research in the Apostolate. So it's in different numbers. 45% in 2015 go to church once a month and on major holidays. That's the blue group. Only 4% are core Catholics who attend masses weekly and make other church activities happen. That was in 2015. I propose to you that any organization that has only 4% of its members that engaged is unsustainable. It's certainly not ideal. So how did we get there? Now, I'm not here to make you depressed. That's not the point. But I do think if we're going to make any real progress, we have to have those kind of false images of where the church is stripped away, because otherwise we're not going to respond differently. So how did we get there? Now, this is my analysis. Other people might do it differently. So that's an iceberg, obviously, and I want to just briefly touch on some of the roots of the problem. So the Industrial Revolution radically changed society. People moved to cities. It had an effect on families. That was, I think, the beginning of the modern downfall. Industrial capitalism and the abuse of labor that happened there. That, of course, led to the World War I, the Roaring '20s, the Great Depression, in which my father was born. Then World War II, the tech revolution, and by tech I mean appliances, refrigerators and stoves and television. The riots and revolution of 1968, if I had to put one tipping point, it would be that year, 1968. And then the emergence of the web in 1994. These are all precursors. So those are the roots of the problem. This is the tip of the iceberg. And I'm going to go into each one of these. The terrorist attacks of 2001 and everything that came after them. It destabilized, to this day, the entire international order. The clergy scandals of 2002. We are still feeling the ramifications of that. The rise of the smartphone. This might be the single most responsible cause for what we're living through, and I'm going to go into that with you. And then finally, the pandemic of 2020. So let's take a closer look at those four. We will never forget this day. The absolutely unimaginable and unthinkable happened in our backyard. That's a before and after event. Everybody has that, who was alive at that time, has that day emblazoned in their minds, and they know when they got the news. I know when. I was at Mass in Honduras. One of our neighbors came to the door and said something terrible has just happened in New York. And I was going to a priest meeting later that day, and I was going around the different shops that had the television. And I mean, you couldn't even digest it. So there was the terrorist attacks, followed by the war on terror, right? That brought in a new epic, which led to conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. And look where we are now, even to this day. It's my own judgment that the soldiers who participated in those various different theaters of conflict suffered deeply from PTSD, which partly set the stage for the opioid crisis. When I first moved to the Bronx in the 80s, heroin was raging, and then crack cocaine. Heroin is such an ugly drug, I never thought it could come back. Well, it's come back. And it's been followed by fentanyl. Now people are taking horse tranquilizers. And all of this can be traced in one way or another back to that event. The rise of ISIS. The movements of mass migration, not only here, but in Europe. In the Middle East, in Africa. The destabilization of the international order that we continue to live in. Did we ever think that the Cold War would return? Remember the fall of the Iron Curtain? It was euphoric. It seemed impossible. And yet, where are we? And from there, coups, invasions, and the return of the Cold War. So that event in 2001 had a huge impact on people's consciousness, awareness, the way they live, the way they view the world. The clergy scandal of 2002. Now, to understand how destructive this was, we have to go back 10 years to the 1990s, right? Because World Youth Day in Denver in 1993, I was there. That for me was the turnaround of the church in the United States. It's when we went from reverse to forward. And it unleashed so much energy and so many ministries in the church. The new evangelization. The 3-year countdown to the millennium. Remember that? The years of the Father, the Holy Spirit, and the Son. 5 continental synods. The Jubilee celebration was euphoric. The church had made a comeback. And it was largely due to the efforts of this man.
Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid.
Be not afraid.
Open your hearts.
Open your hearts to Christ. Open economies. Open political orders to Christ. Pope Benedict, who at that time was Cardinal Ratzinger, gave the funeral homily at Pope John Paul II's funeral. And he said something that I remember when I read it, it was like, I don't know, I froze because it was powerful. He turned back with the strength of a titan, a strength which came to him from God, a tide which seemed irreversible. He gave us the strength to believe in Christ. He led us across the threshold of hope. He restored Christianity to its true face as a religion of hope. But then, in 2002, we were broadsided, unprepared. So, again, I want to make it very personal. This is my Catholic grade school, Sacred Heart in St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. The school is now closed because the one remaining school is on a different campus. But something very horrible happened there. When my cousin Kevin, who is now in his mid-50s, he was repeatedly raped by a priest in the parish with the conscious or unconscious cooperation of the principal. The priest would go to the principal's office, ask to see this boy. He was in 2nd grade. The principal would go to get him, I don't know where he took him, but this happened repeatedly. His parents, his 4 siblings, and their children have all stopped attending Mass and receiving the sacraments. My aunt describes herself as a heartbroken Catholic. I pray for them often for a catharsis, because you can just feel the anguish and the trauma. So just to recap the fallout, the Boston Globe's reporting highlighted in the film Spotlight, the Dallas Charter, the John Jay study, which was published in the extensive study in the New York Times, as you may remember, the investigations by individual states, starting with Pennsylvania in 2019. That's the year that my cousin shared with the rest of us what had happened to him. That was the year that the Pennsylvania report came out, which it largely rehashed things that were already known. But then in Pennsylvania, we realized what this man did. And this cuts very close to home, because he was here. And it wasn't just the United States. There were international cases, Ireland, France, and South America. Lawsuits and the bankruptcies of dioceses, including Rockville Center, Buffalo, basically wherever they lifted the statute of limitations for civil suits for these things, many dioceses have become bankrupt. A complete loss of moral authority and trust. And when I talk to priests, I try to tell them this. We do not have the moral high ground in people's eyes. We can't just invoke or say, you're supposed to. We lost that. It's gone. It's one of the 2 main reasons that people give for leaving the church. The other one is the church's stance on LGBTQ issues. But that's how big it is and how much it figures into what we're facing. The rise of the smartphone and the ubiquity of digital media, okay? So I'm going to quote from this book. It's a really interesting read. The Internet, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, The Shallows by Nicholas Carr. It was a bestseller. And the whole first part of the book is before the rise of the smartphone. So it was just the Internet when we had dial-up connections, right? The difference that the smartphone made is that we are always online. We're never not online. We are always plugged into that. We are always, and it has exerted an incredible influence over us. The internet subverts our patience and our concentration. Our thinking becomes superficial, our memories suffer, we become less reflective and more impulsive. Technology alters patterns of perception. It changes the way that we see the world. We use different categories. The use of technology physically alters the synaptic links and rewires the brain. That's maybe the most shocking thing, because they used to think that our brains were like permanently wired, that they weren't plastic, but that's not true. Our brains readjust these synaptic links based on the kind of use that we're doing. So if we're on the internet, a whole different set of neural synapses is set up than if we are reading or doing something else. Literacy, especially deep reading. Deep reading is when you become very absorbed in a book and an article. You kind of forget about what else is going on. And scientists have discovered that it's really important. First of all, you're reading at a pace in which that information can go into your long-term memory. It's a very small, it's like a funnel, right? And if you're shooting a lot of energy in, it's not going to get in there. But if you're doing deep reading, it's more likely. But you're also making all kinds of connections in your brain. It's something really amazing is going on. So literacy and especially deep reading is weakened, and there is narrowing of expressiveness and the loss of eloquence. I'm going to just give you one piece of information. Have you noticed how the F-bomb has gone from being something that you rarely hear to something that you always hear? It's gone from, truckers and sailors to, I remember the first time walking through an airport when I heard these beautiful young college co-eds dropping F-bombs like it was nothing. As a matter of fact, it's not even a bomb anymore. It's like a firecracker or a snap and pop. That's how common it is. If you used any other word, as much as people use that word, you would sound like an idiot. But we don't know. We've lost our ability to speak because we're not reading and we're just mouthing everything that we see and hear on the internet. It is an ecosystem of interruption technologies. It's an interruption machine. Now just think about it when you sit down to look at your email. Things start popping up. If you go to a news site, boom, 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 boom. What are your settings you want on this? And this ad and that ad. And often, I'm guessing you have the same experience that I do. You get on the internet or you review your email wanting to do some specific thing, and about 20 minutes or a half an hour later, you remember why you went there. And you haven't got there yet because you've been rerouted, distracted, interrupted over and over again. Its sensory and cognitive stimuli are repetitive, intensive, and addictive. Repetitive, intensive, interactive, and addictive. On purpose. It is trying to grab and hold your attention. The internet may well be the most mind-altering technology that has ever come into general use. Think about that. The most mind-altering technology, changing the way we think, the way we see, the way we respond. It becomes harder to distinguish between relevant and irrelevant information. We become, I love this phrase, mindless consumers of data. We see a lot, we hear it, but it's just like mindless, flowing through us. Intensive multitaskers are suckers for irrelevancy. Everything distracts them. We are training our brains to pay attention to crap. The great danger we face as we become more immersed in digital technology is that we lose our humanness. We become alienated from the natural world. I went to an event in the city in February called the New York Encounter. It's a free event put on by Community and Liberation, and there was a woman who works for the American Enterprise Institute. She has written a book called I'm trying to remember, it's The Abolition of Experience. And she goes through how everything in our life is now become mediated by technology. Medicine, communication, dating, reading. It's like we don't have real experiences anymore. We only have digitally mediated experiences. That was all written before the rise of the smartphone. So he has an addendum to it, and he adds some things. An American adult spends approximately 10 hours of the day total on screen time, more than half of their waking hours. Smartphones have amplified everything that I just talked about and accelerated it. Phone notifications produce symptoms of hyperactivity and absent-mindedness. And they're similar to people who suffer from ADHD. And what does it do to you if you suffer from ADHD? Our attention becomes completely fragmented, we lose our focus. This is something really interesting that I learned from Nicholas Carr. We have something called a salience network. And that helps us to know, so right now in the church, there's just so many, I'm being bombarded by lots of stimuli. How do I know what to pay attention to? Because I can't pay attention to everything. Well, the salience network does that for me. It focuses on, it gives priority to 4 types of stimuli. The new or unexpected, which could be positive or negative, right? The pleasurable or rewarding, the personally relevant, it applies to me, and the emotionally engaging. Those are the 4 things that my salience network prioritizes and tells me to pay attention to. The smartphone is all of that wrapped up into one shiny object that fits in your pocket. It can give you endless things that are new, pleasurable, and all your social media sites are personally relevant. It has kind of weaponized or turbocharged this process. It's an attention magnet unlike any other, a supernormal stimulus that is able to hijack attention whenever it's part of the surroundings, which is always. Now, those of us who are older don't experience this in the same way. But people certainly under 20, under 30, it's inconceivable. Just the physical presence of their cell phone on the desk is enough to distract them without looking at it. They're aware of it all the time. Social media architects have deliberately exploited this vulnerability in the human psyche in a way similar to the psychological conditioning created by the people who made slot machines. Right? The spinning, the excitement, all of that is just meant to keep you on and on and on and on with this. This helps explain society's current gullibility crisis with its attendant plague of propaganda, dogma, and venom. And it's not even just the content of the internet. It's the way that it works, and it's what it does to us. It's how it affects our focus. It makes us... Have you noticed that people's default state now seems to be agitation? Right? That's my default state, which can easily erupt into anger or frustration. It's amazing when you go to a developing country like Africa or Jamaica or Honduras, people's default state there is happy. They're generally happy. But ours has been undermined by this technology. So here's another book this guy teaches at NYU. It's on internet addiction. And the big tech people know this. Steve Jobs and other people, they didn't allow their children to use iPads. They knew what it would do for them. They wanted them to read. And what does that tell you? You know, what if somebody won't eat their own cooking? Are you going to eat it? They know better. They knew that they were creating engines for addiction. A design ethicist, Tristan Harris, said that it's not that people lack willpower, but that there are 1,000 people on the other side of that screen doing everything they can to keep your attention. Google tested, I think, 20 different colors of blue to pick the one that they use. And this is done with precision, with a lot of money, with a lot of very smart people. I remember years ago, just from the use of credit card and those little saving, you know, like your Target, you build up credit, they could predict with, I think, like 75 or 80% accuracy when a woman was pregnant because of the change in her buying patterns. They knew more about us than we knew about ourselves, and that's even more true now because all of your internet behavior is being tracked and associated with you. New York Times journalist Nick Bilton said that the environment and the circumstances of what we're living in now are far more conducive to addiction than anything humans have experienced in our history. So take that with the other quote from Nicholas Carr, right? The internet may well be the most mind-altering technology that we've ever invented, and that the circumstances that we're living in and the technology that we have available to is far more conducive to addiction than anything that has come before. And that's a tall statement because opium, heroin, alcohol, far more addictive. It's estimated that 40% of the population suffers from some form of internet addiction. And these are the symptoms. A loss of control as when to start or not or get off. So am I on it more than I want? And do I find it hard to disengage when I'm on the internet? It can interfere with my job, my relationship, and social activities. It can cause legal problems, health problems, emotional trauma, and other activities are given up as less enjoyable. All because this reality has encroached on my life to a debilitating degree. Before I go on to COVID, I want to just mention to you, you might have seen it in the news this week. There was, I think it was at Harvard, a group of scientists did a study to compare our brain activity and involvement involving 3 different settings. So one of them, they had to write SAT type essays. So one group could only use their own, what they could remember or come up with on their own. Another group could use a search engine, but not artificial intelligence, ChatGPT. And the other group could use ChatGPT in the search engine. What they found was that there was noticeably, significantly less brain activity in the group that could use ChatGPT. There was less cutting and pasting, a lot of that going on. They felt less ownership to it. The language was, of course, much more like that, which was spewed out by that. So what happens if we start using ChatGPT for everything? They're worried that AI is going to get smarter than us. Well, it's going to get faster because we're going to keep getting dumber. I've never seen the movie, but a lot of people have talked to me about it. It's called Idiocracy. So this guy goes into a coma somehow and wakes up years in the future. And he was no great shakes when he went to sleep, but people have become so dumb that he appears on the scene as a genius. And so just when you think, how could it get worse, is we're dependent on something that causes us to think less and use less of our brains. Last one, COVID-19 and the shaking of the tree. The COVID-19 pandemic gave the impression that Mass is optional. You don't have to come to Mass on Sunday. We didn't do it in COVID. I like watching Mass on television. When I hear somebody say that, as a priest, I have to tell you, part of me inside screams. Because I want to ask the person, I don't want to overwhelm them, but do you know what the Eucharist is? Do you know what Mass is? Do you understand the difference of being there, participating in the sacrifice of Christ, receiving his body and blood, and just watching that on television? Now, if that's all you can do, that's great. But it's incomparable, the difference. And it's somehow, that fact is gone. It revealed a shallowness of conviction, a lack of authentic religious experience, and a weakening of integration and adherence. It also revealed inroads of an antagonistic popular culture. And it had tremendous collateral damage. Now, with the shift that has taken place, some dissenting voices in COVID-19, and there were high-powered ones. I'm not talking about crazy theories. There were very serious scientists who had different opinions, well, certainly about the origin of COVID-19, but also the measures to be taken. They were effectively silenced, just as happened with the transgender issue. There are now a good number of serious studies saying there's no evidence that it helps children, right? You couldn't say that a few years ago. The collateral damage, though, from COVID, anxiety, depression, digital immersion, what had already started got supercharged. We were already shopping on Amazon, but then it became Whole Food deliveries. And you see, if you go into Manhattan, you see the people pushing those carts, right? We don't even go out to shop anymore. We work from home. We talk from home. It's created immersion and isolation. It magnified polarization, aggression, detachment from reality, and susceptibility to false claims, constant agitation, and more seclusion. So again, because of the effects of the internet and the smartphone, what were we all doing during the lockdown? We were on the internet all the time. And this one is very interesting. This is from secular news sources. Cases of gender dysphoria, that's people who think that they are transgender, soared, spiked, skyrocketed, exploded. Why? Because they were living in that digital corner of the universe, detached from the rest of reality, getting sucked further and further into a subjectivity that was divorced from contact with reality. So, what's the cumulative effect of these four factors? Disorientation and disillusionment. Lack of clarity and uncertainty. Fear, confusion, anger, manipulation, seduction, and addiction, agitation, disaffiliation. It's not a conducive environment to church participation. And that's why I think those four factors taken cumulatively, it's like a wrecking ball. It just has demolished so much. But now we're going to kind of hit the positive side. Where do we go from here? I want to give two examples of two sources that I think can help us find the direction. The first is from a radio address given by a young father, Joseph Ratzinger. I think it was in 1969, called The Church of the Future. Okay, it's extremely prophetic. And secondly is the history of the Egyptian Coptic Orthodox Church, which is really a message of hope. So, Joseph Ratzinger and the Church of the Future. I need to read some quotes here. In the crisis of today, the church of the tomorrow will emerge. She will become small and will have to start from the beginning. She will no longer be able to inhabit many of the edifices that she built. Sound familiar? She will lose many of her social privileges. She will be very much more a voluntary society entered only by free decision. And by the way, that's happening. I think there were 10,000 adult baptisms in France this year. And it's not just there. If you do an internet search, I just kind of found this information out, even here in the United States. Not huge numbers, but I point it out because these are adults choosing to be baptized. She will make much bigger demands on her members. She will be a more spiritual church, not political. It will be hard going. The church will be poor, a church of the meek. Sectarian narrow-mindedness and self-will have to be shaken. There's no room for that in a lifeboat. It will take time. The process will be long and wearisome. But after, great power will flow from a more spiritual and simplified church. Because men in a totally planned world will find themselves unspeakably lonely. If they have lost sight of God, they will feel the whole horror of their poverty. Then they will discover the little flock of believers as something wholly new. They will discover it as a hope that is meant for them, an answer for which they have always been searching in secret, the lifeboat that can keep them from drowning. The church is facing very hard times. The real crisis has scarcely begun. That was in 1969. We will have to count on terrific upheavals. But what will remain at the end is not the church of the political cult, which is already dead, but the church of faith. It may well no longer be the dominant social power to the extent that she was until recently, but it will enjoy a fresh blossoming and be seen as man's home, where he will find life and hope beyond death. That is the mission of the church. I know I myself, and I think many people struggled, again, because of John Paul II's talk of the new springtime and the new evangelization and what happened in those years leading up to 2000. And then after all these things, we were sort of left like, well, what happened? I think I misconceived what that new springtime was going to be like. That it was going to be the massive church of the 1950s again. No. There is a springtime happening. The first sprouts are coming up. But it's going to be very different. And when I read this description, I was like, yes. This is the new springtime of the church. And it is borne out very much, in the experience of the Orthodox Coptic Church in Egypt. You may remember that in 2015, ISIS beheaded 21 men on a beach in Libya. It was horrifically gruesome. And I remember at the time thinking, how did these men, they were ordinary construction workers. How did they have the faith and the courage to allow themselves to be martyred? And then it kind of went out of my mind. And then it was in, it was in 2023 that the Coptic Patriarch visited Rome and brought relics of these 21 martyrs who the Coptic Church had canonized and gave them to Pope Francis, and he inscribed them in the Roman martyrology, which means that we can celebrate them and have devotion to them. And that called my attention to this book. The 21, A Journey into the Land of the Coptic Martyrs. It is a great read because these were ordinary men with families, construction workers, but with a deep faith forged in a church of martyrs that prepared them. They knew that they were running that risk. They knew it, and they were prepared for the outcome. The church in Egypt in the first few centuries was glorious, even if she was persecuted by the Roman Empire, right? It was the church of Alexandria, St. Anthony of the Desert, St. Athanasius, the church of the monks and the martyrs. The Egyptian church, by the way, that's St. Anthony of Egypt. The Egyptian church was conquered, along with the rest of the country, in the mid-600s, first by the Persians and then by the Arabs. This marked the beginning of an almost interminable period of discrimination, humiliation, and impoverishment. A special tax was imposed on Christians. Churches were burned to the ground and could not be rebuilt. Copts were required to wear recognizable dress. At times, they were forced to carry a 5-pound cross around their necks. Such relentless harassment caused more and more Copts to apostatize, to lose faith, and become Muslim. And the once primarily Christian country became predominantly Islamic, with only a small Coptic minority. By the 16th century, there were only 112 churches left in a land that once contained thousands. The end seemed inevitable. But in the mid-19th century, totally unexpectedly, after more than 1,000 years of decline, the Coptic Church began to stir again. Merchants introduced Western civilization into Egypt. Later came the Suez Canal and interaction with the British, whose Catholic and Protestant missionaries poured into the country and worked unhindered. The poll tax on Christians was abolished. Sunday schools were established. Theological seminaries were opened to educate priests. Old and almost abandoned monasteries began to fill up, and to this day can barely accommodate all those who want to enter. And two very charismatic popes headed the church in the 20th century. That's one of them. Renewed persecution in the 1970s against this newly revived church only stoked its enthusiasm. I don't know if you know this, but the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared twice during dangerous political crises before thousands of Christians and Muslims in Cairo, and was once photographed. That's her there. "We are the Church of the Martyrs" is a phrase heard over and over again from young Copts. In any Coptic family, you will find the same attitude toward the church everywhere, the same strong faith, and the same readiness for martyrdom. This miraculous resurrection can only be attributed to an intervention by God. This is the church of tomorrow, described by Joseph Ratzinger. The spiritual church, the church of faith, the church of the meek, from whom flows the power of God. The church of the martyrs, a church that holds out hope to us. So again, just to review, because we're coming up on our hour, I wanted to do some demolition first, right, to try to eliminate that practical denial of the grave situation that we're facing, right, the urgency of that, but recognizing that offers us an opportunity. If we can adjust our mentality and begin to do things differently, we can begin that initial stirring. And I don't know, maybe there's going to have to be a lot more deadwood. I know there is. We're going to lose a lot more buildings. The church is going to become significantly smaller. I don't know if I'm even going to live to see the turnaround point. But boy, do I want to do everything I can to and if we're going to be retreating for a while, I want to pull as many people back behind that front line and out of the rubble as I can, so that when that moment comes, the church will flourish again. And that's part of what I was talking about in the homily, right? We have to prune the things that are unnecessary, distracting, because if we don't, we will be dragged into it with forces and techniques and technologies that are becoming more and more formidable. If I can use an example from The Lord of the Rings, if you've read the books, you might have seen the movie. There is this device called a palantir. It looks like a crystal ball. And in the ancient days of Gondor, they were in different places. It's how they communicated over long distances. Well, when the story comes up, there's only 3 left. Sauron has one in the tower, the regent of Gondor has one, and Sauron has one. So, and I used to use this as an example for television, but I think it's even more so for the internet. Sauron looked into it and was seduced by Sauron. Denethor looked into it and he wasn't seduced, but he only saw what Sauron wanted him to see, and he despaired. Only Aragorn had the strength and freedom of will to make the Palantir do what he wanted. I think that's a somewhat apt analogy. We have to be very much aware of the forces that are involved in the use of technology. I'm not anti-technology, but just to be aware that every time we go to a website or turn on a television or the radio, we are being targeted. And we have to have the strength and the sobriety, right, to live soberly in our use of these things. So they serve us and don't enslave us. I might have time for 1 or 2 quick questions. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, and you will get the booklet tomorrow, but I hope it's helpful to understand where are we and how did we get here, and what continues to cause us. Yes? I mean, I think it's early. I mean, I had a very positive impression of Pope Leo from the very beginning, mostly because of the way that other people described him. He has a skill set that's very unique in terms of being interpersonal, communicating. He's also very good with kind of summarizing and synthesizing information. He had a very, very important job. He was the prefect of the dicastery for the selection of bishops. So I'm very hopeful. But I say this because I follow the Pope, right? I followed John Paul II. I followed Benedict XVI. I followed Francis. I will follow Leo because I believe that he's been given to us by the Holy Spirit. But I do think it offers a unique opportunity for the United States. I'm thinking he'll be maybe a little more diplomatic in terms of maybe dealing with the U.S. government and some of the figures in the government. I think he understands American culture better, and so the way that he may state things would be keeping that in mind as well. But he also has the perspective of Peru and the world. So, yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I'm hopeful. We need to pray for him a lot.
After everything you went through with your family, how did you find the calling?
I was already a priest. Yeah, I was ordained in 1994. I'm old. But I can tell you that was the summer from hell, excuse my language. I mean, that it was bad enough back in 2002. I mean, just feeling guilty by association and nauseous, and every time you read this. But to have it happen in my own hometown and members of my family, and then the Pennsylvania report, the same time, there were other priests who had served or were from my hometown. Yeah. But maybe it was something, well, I don't mean to say that we needed it and that it was supposed to happen. But my aunt, and at first I didn't agree with her, because she loves the church, she believes in God, she loves the Eucharist. But I think she feels torn. So she said something, she said, you know, let's just let them sue us. Let them sue us for as much as they want. Give them the churches, give them the buildings. And you know, the more I thought about that, the more I thought we could have killed 2 birds with 1 stone. We could have been generous and taken responsibility, and all these places that we're closing would have been taken out of our hands, and we might be decades ahead of where we are now and getting to the point when we can renew again. But I also think too, and this is with the Eucharistic revival, I think we, especially church in the United States, we hit what we thought was our high point in the early 60s. Cardinal Spellman was the Pope, and the American Pope, right? John F. Kennedy was the US President. Hollywood was producing lots of Catholic movies, Going My Way, The Bells of St. Mary's, The Song of Bernadette, Fatima, with big actors, right? Archbishop Fulton Sheen beat Milton Berle in the ratings race, right? We had arrived. We had the papal flag on one side of the altar and the American flag on the other side of the altar to show everybody that we were just like everyone else. And that's when we sacrificed our distinctiveness and began to be assimilated, right? Because look what happened with Catholic politicians, especially the Catholic dynasties. The patriarchs and matriarchs, they wanted to be very clear that they were practicing Catholics and wanted to be considered that way, despite whatever political position that they had. Their children were sort of Catholic, but not really. Their grandchildren are not. You know, the Kennedys, the Cuomos, you know, take your pick. But we relinquished that distinctiveness and we got absorbed. And we also began to think, I think, that our institutions we had big hospitals, big universities, Ivy League type universities. We had schools, we had infrastructure, we had big buildings and seminaries. Somehow, though, we lost track of the Eucharist, right? And so what's happening? All those things are being taken away. And I tell people, you know what? We could lose everything. You could lose this church, all the other church buildings here, St. Joseph Hospital, Seton Hall, we could lose all of that. And if we still have the Eucharist, we have everything. But if we have all that and lose track of the Eucharist, we end up with nothing. So in the midst of all of this, I think God has a plan and he's working through that. I'm trying to kind of read the signs of the times. And tomorrow's all going to be about how do we respond to this? This is the situation. This is where we are. This is why we are where we are. We have an idea of where we might be going through that very prophetic message of Joseph Ratzinger and the experience of the Orthodox Coptic Church. I'm going to give you what I think are some suggestions as to how we can respond to this opportunity. I hope you'll join us tomorrow night. Yep, I think we're good. You were going to say Church? yeah? Doing what? Oh, yeah. Well, there's a new fire station right around the corner from where we're relatively looking to, so we have to do this. Yeah. I need to take this back because I got the book to do tomorrow. And I want to do a little bit of editing of some of the slides in the next presentation. Yeah, but thank you. No, Tuesday. Tuesday, adoration and confession. Yeah, it's kind of, and we can make it a night of prayer for the parish, right? Because I do, I mean, I hold on. You were there, huh?
I was there.
Oh, I like that. Oh, yeah.
You know, I have a really interesting story with my fiance. He's my nephew, and he doesn't live with me. My brother is living. I'm praying for his conversion as well, and his mother. But very interesting. One thing that one of the ways that I just start my day is I always have my sacrament
Oh, yeah.
left in the monastery. It's not the same.
No, but yeah, but it's still,
Something.
yeah.
Well, my nephew comes up and he comes up and he's like, that's Jesus. Isn't that sweet? Yeah.
We can pray to call who is for him because his family wasn't practicing. He led his family to Christ. Yeah. By the way, the new mass today, it was incredible. Like,
Oh, the new mass.
just like the singing and it was amazing.
It's a very spiritual group, really, really
Yeah.
great group.
And that's without the
Yes.
Oh, wow. No, it was, I mean, every mass was like that, right? And people participated. I came to the conclusion that is the renewal that we need. If we allowed mass to be that regenerative, transforming experience, then every Sunday we would come and be transformed and re-energized. Yeah, but so much depends on the attitude, perspective, and mindset that we have in coming to it, right? And I think we all know that people who are sitting next to us have an effect on us, you know? And even the readers, when we did the reading at the 10 o'clock mass, excellent job.
That's Rick's son.
Yeah, it took that long to sing, but it's just that. So, and sometimes I would tell people to Eucharistic relations. So, how many people are what if we all really started to approach Mass without names? That's led and encouraged. So that's why I don't mind if it's a small turnout. I want people who are serious, and I want people who really want to be all in this.
What do you think of the flame of love and living in the Picoretta? Do you know?
I know of that. The flame of love, I don't know. I don't know enough to make a sound judgment, but the flame was always
It is a little bit of a hard sometimes. But I feel like some of it really, it says in the Our Father, thy will be done, and we live in it today. Like I feel like, for example, these martyrs who can come up, I'm like, they must
Yeah, well,